Good afternoon, actually good morning still. I'm Kelly Bergman, Operations and Vendor Relations Specialist, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you all to the Rockus Blum Computer Consulting Annual User Conference. This conference marks our 15th year, which is amazing, and we could not be more excited to be able to continue to offer this session to you, these sessions to you. In this action-packed session, sales and consulting specialist Kristen Baumgartner is here to walk you through just how you can automate your warehouse to increase your visibility, eliminate errors, and increase your warehouse's KPIs. But before we launch into that, let's get rid of these housekeeping notes quick. Today's session is being recorded and it will be available on our website in the next couple weeks here. All attendees are on mute. If you have questions during the session, there's two options down there. There's a Q&A and there's a chat. So go ahead, pick your favorite. We'll address all of the questions at the end of the session. CPE credit is being offered for all of these sessions today. So we'll get a survey. I'm thinking it's going out on Friday. It'll just have a little section on there for that. So answer the questions, fill that out, and we'll get you a certificate in the next couple weeks. Now, on to the reason we're here. With Kristen's many years working directly with the software, we know you're in good hands for this session. Kristen, would you like to wow us?
Thank you so much for the intro, Kelly, and thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Kristen Baumgartner, as Kelly mentioned. I am a sales and consulting specialist, but what I focus on is actually physical inventory processes. So a lot of my experience comes from working the floor, working manufacturing facilities, and seeing how we can translate the information we need into the Sage 100 software. So that's kind of my background and where I come from. Those who know me best will know me as the barcode therapist. Lay back on my couch, tell me your problems, and we'll find a solution for you. We're going to go ahead and start today's presentation. So today we are going to be focusing on warehouse and multibin. And this is referred to as a tale of two softwares. Now, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And I won't bore everybody with going into a literary background here, but I do think that the majority of us have felt this during software implementations or looking at new products. It's the best because we can see the potential, we can see all the information we're looking to set up and capture, but it can also be the worst because it takes a lot of time. And if certain things aren't set up correctly, we don't really get the solution that we ultimately envision. So what we're going to dig in today really truly is the complexities of warehouse automation and multi-bin software and where those complexities are very strong and integrated. But again, showing you what is possible and what we can gain collectively from these solutions. So by the end of this, we're hoping it's going to be the best of time scenario. Really quickly, want to go over how this presentation is going to flow. First, we're going to go through a brief history lesson. I am a firm believer that we cannot move forward unless we know where we're coming from. So we're going to look a little bit at the background of these two solutions we're going to focus on today. Very important, and I want everybody, you own this question. What's in it for you? Why spend the time with me to review this information? Where are the benefits when we look at these types of software extensions for your Sage 100 system? We are going to go a day in a life. And for those of you who have joined me for other presentations, a day in the life is actually real world scenarios and case studies. So we can actually walk through functionality as it applies to the real world. Definitely keep your ears open, see if any of those situations apply to you. We're going to show some variations and let us know again if this is something that you would want to talk more about or find more information out. Finally, we're going to go to Q&A. As Kelly had mentioned, we are going to save questions and answers for the end of the presentation. You do have those two options to submit them, and Kelly's going to help me go through those questions at the end of our presentation. So let's get it kicked off here, a history lesson. Now, I want to focus on two solutions today. They are multi-bin that was originally created by the ACS group, and that was about 25 plus years ago. And we're also going to be looking at the Scanco Warehouse 100 solution as it's called today. And that was created about 30 or so years ago. Now, the reason we want to focus on the history here, and obviously with decades behind both of these solutions, we are short pairing this history. I'm actually illustrating some things that are very, very important for each of these solutions to kind of show you the roadmap as to how they came together. Again, understanding where we were so we can understand where we need to go. So Multibin was originally created, as I mentioned, over 25 years ago. It was owned by a company called the ACS Group, and they really were the first offering for multiple location tracking directly within your Sage 100 environment. They went through decades of listening to customers, what they were trying to get out of the solution, and continued to build onto their products and build the complexity of a multi-bin system. So not only are you getting multiple location trackings, but now we're getting intelligent algorithms that can be linked to that location tracking on maximum and minimum capacities, primary locations, overflow locations. It really truly became a robust solution. Now, in 2015, and I do realize we're jumping quite a few years into the future here, but they ended up developing an integration with the ScanCo Warehouse 100 application. So Multibin was feeding onto the scanning devices. And in 2018, not only did ACS Group merge in with ScanCo, but ScanCo acquired both of their core developers from the ACS Group who had written these solutions. Now, ScanCo on the other side, when they started, they were one of the, they are the Sage barcode OEM developer for Sage 100. So they've actually had a very long-term relationship with Sage directly as an OEM developer. They began warehouse automation product launches. In 2016, they brought in JDB Solutions Group. So those of you on the call that might have been familiar with the WO Scan or JO Scan solutions, they came into the ScanCo product fold. In 2017, they actually acquired what then was referred to as the Job Ops software, which we all know and love now as operations management. And truly where we start to see both of these solutions conjoin is in 2018. With the acquisition of ACS Group, those product developers worked on a fully integrated product launch of Multibin for the Job Ops solution. So again, over the years, they've been getting closer and closer with integrating these solutions. And today we actually have some amazing integrations between these different software packages. Now, this is not a classroom, so we are done with the history lesson, okay? We don't want to listen to any more. We want to talk about why is your time important in this? Why is it worth sitting through this presentation? There are common pains that regardless of your distribution or manufacturing facility that we see from the majority of our customers. They fall into three primary buckets. It's how I like to look at them. And they really encompass control and visibility, simplifying and streamlining our processes, and reducing our costs, right? Three very key components for why floor automation, information coming up from the floor, is important for your Sage 100 system. I'm an auditor by background, which means my control, my visibility, it has to be there. I have to see what's going on. And when you introduce a solution onto the floor, sometimes we feel that that control starts to slip away as we gain our visibility. These solutions are truly designed to give you the best of both worlds, where we're getting validation back to Sage, we're controlling what employees can and cannot do in their collection of information, but we're getting the visibility in a real time. When we talk about real time, again, kind of if you've never looked at automation, think about your processes now. If there's something that we need to capture, whatever that piece of information is based on the floor, we have to write it down. That has to be on paperwork, that has to go to someone else typically. Sometimes it can be that same person, but you're still taking information from the paperwork and bringing it to your Sage 100 system. Simplifying and streamlining this is where we're actually automatically feeding this information directly into Sage. You still maintain control because you get to ultimately decide what passes into Sage. You can make edits if you like, but this is what's building that real-time data and visibility within your system. This also helps reduce our costs. Think about how much time we spend wandering around looking for items, how much time we spend doing paperwork hand-ins to another person who has to manually key that. Most of the people who work in Sage are going to have really great keystroke accuracy, but there's still a problem. There's still that potential for errors when we're entering information, either from the person entering it or transposing numbers, or maybe we just can't even read the handwriting. The reduction of costs is actually simplifying this entire process. So if you think of anyone that is a keyer, someone that is data entry within your organization, their role changes to a reviewer where all the information is pre-populated. And again, they can review and confirm this information is correct before we post on into our Sage 100, go into our GL and our inventory numbers. These 3 buckets, this is really why it's important for you. And as we go through these solutions, like I said, we are looking at the higher level complexities. So see if any of these stories, any of these situations speak to you. And again, this might be something that we could look at as far as expanding your functionality in your organization. So first one we are going to look at in the day in the life, how can I track pallets? Now, this is a very common buzzword out there, and it is referred to as license plating. First and foremost, I want to define what this is. Let's cut through all the BS. We're going to get right down to it. License plating is a specific need to track single or mixed items as a unique group. Now, I want you guys to really think about that statement. We talk about pallets, we talk about license plating, and a lot of the time people think about this is a pallet of wood or plastic. These are the items that I'm tracking. This technically can be altered in concept to doing case packs, where you have things traveling in the same box, the same pallet, the same bin. But the true defining need is that those items need to be identified as a group. Now, what are some common scenarios of this? A lot of customers I work with, they'll want to introduce license plating because maybe they do have heavy overstocks. Maybe they're seasonal, maybe they need to buy in massive bulk, and they are going to be putting full pallets up in upper racks. They don't want anyone to mess with having to break apart that pallet or look at the details of it. They just want to recognize this is a pallet. These are my items. And as I move them from the warehouse to different locations, from overstock to staging to maybe issuing to a manufacturing line, I don't want to mess with all the individual information. This is super streamlined if you are dealing with multiple serials or lots. So again, think if you're using lotted information and you've got mixed lots on that pallet, or you're dealing with serialized items, and there can be between 2 to, let's say, 500 serialized items on a pallet. This gives a unique identifier to represent all of those counts, all of that lot, and all of that serial information in one scan. The other solution or the other situation that we might see is that some customers have a specific need to create a group of items together. I did have the privilege of working with one customer, and they actually created displays for trade shows. And every time an order would come in, they would send out their items to be tracked to specific trade shows. The majority of those items were non-consumable, which means they would come back. Some of them were consumable, but they did want to give a representation of one number that represented all of those unique items together in one pallet, or crate actually is what they use. When they sent them out, they could use this unique identifier and have visibility in their system to know who it was sent out to, what event it was sent out to, and when it came back, to know what was supposed to be in that crate so they could check it back in. Again, those are two kind of opposite sides of the coin for we want something generic so we can just move it around easily versus I want a bunch of specific items together so I can track that through my system. This does create, again, that unique pallet ID visibility. And in license plating, that generation can be generated by the scanners. It can be generated in your Sage system. But one of the most amazing things is how it can impact your physical counts. So no more PowerPoint presentation for right now. Let's actually get into our Sage environment and take a look at how this solution works. What you're seeing right now is an AirPlay of my iOS device. So I'm playing it up to the screen so you guys can see the software in real time. This is my Sage demo environment. So as we go through the transactions, we're going to be able to see how this feeds back into our Sage environment. So on my handheld scanner, I am logged in. For those of you that have recognized this before or been with me in other presentations, this is a Scanco Warehouse 100 solution. I did log in with my unique identifier of KB2 for our presentation, and I'm in company code. This is my Sage company, MB2, which you can see is what I'm showing in my Sage system here. So the very first thing when we're talking about license plating is how can we create pallets? Well, if depending on where we have them in our process, a place that we can create them is in our receiving process. At a receipt of goods, you can group those items together and create pallets. If you did not have items that were coming in a receiving process that you wanted to palletize, but you still needed to create a pallet, we're actually going to look at our advanced functionality from the scanner. I'm going to touch on that icon and I'm going to create a new pallet within my system. When I use that icon, the first prompt I get is what type of pallet am I building? Now, again, most of us are thinking of a wood or plastic pallet, but you can have box types, case types. In this example, I'm actually going to clear out my pallet type and do a lookup for you. I actually have two different types of pallets within my system. One of them I refer to as my standard or raw materials pallet. The other one is a finished good pallet. This type of visibility can be really helpful when you're going through your inventory levels. It's not necessary to track different types. You can default everything to just being a pallet ID. That works as well. But this is where the flexibility of the solution starts to come in. So you can run reports, you can look at your inventory levels and start to see based on specific parameters and our naming what types of pallets those are. I am going to create a standard pallet. This is going to be some of my raw materials. And the next question I get is my pallet number. Now, one thing I'm always a big fan of is the least amount of keying possible is the best. That means we scan barcodes, we do any kind of automated generation, whatever we can do to shortcut it. It cuts down on data entry errors, and it makes anybody who's using a device on the floor, it just makes their life simple and streamlined. I could key in this information, as in most ScanCo solutions, when we see a red box, it is a presentation for information. I can scan, but remember, I'm creating a new pallet, so I may not have a label here that I can easily scan. Another thing that I can do is actually use this hashtag up here. When I use that hashtag, it calls out to my Sage environment and will automatically enter the next pallet number in my sequence. And this sequence number is unique to what type of pallet I've created. So I could have a finished good pallet that also represents as pallet number 18, but it would be indicated by that finished good in the beginning of my pallet number. I'm going to confirm which warehouse I'm bringing it into. I'm going to do all of my work today in my main warehouse. And the next thing it's going to ask is which bin am I putting this in? Now, for any of us not familiar with the multi-bin system, this is where we are tracking locations. And they can be extremely specific. They can be general staging areas, or they can just be the east side and the west side of the warehouse. Again, bins can be set up to represent whatever is easiest for your employees to know where to bring those items to. In this case, the new pallet that I'm going to create is, let's say I'm going to be putting it away in one of my bin locations. And I have several of them set up. Again, I'm a cheater, so I'm going to scan a barcode that represents my HW01 location. And now it's going to ask me for this pallet, what items am I bringing in? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scan one of my items here. Now, this is a validated item to my Sage environment. Because we're coming up on Halloween, you're going to notice a theme for all of my items today. This is my standard valuation item. So I do not have lot or serial with this, but we will show you examples of those as well. You can see it's pulling in my Sage item code, my description, my unit of measure, and it's asking which location I'm taking it from. Now, real quick, I just want to show you guys, there is an image attached here. If I touch on that image, I can actually zoom in with my fingers. So if we have a multilingual staff, or if there is a visual representation of items that helps employees do their job, they can be brought out to the handheld scanners. This image file is just attached in my inventory management in my item maintenance as my JPEG file on my second tab. So again, you can load whatever images make sense. I'm going to go back to that bin from. When I am selecting a bin, it is validating in my system, which means that if I do not have any quantities available in a location, it will stop me. I'm also with Multibin not allowed to over issue what I have. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, you know what, I want to put 100 of these buckets onto one pallet. That's going to make it really easy for me to count that. Again, my pallet stays as pallet 18. I can choose to tap in this prompt and change it. Or if I hit that hashtag again, I can just jump to my next pallet number. I confirm the warehouse. Oops. I need a valid warehouse that I have access to. Let me go ahead and enter that in. And again, it's going to go through the series of prompts again. This time, I'm going to put it in a different location. I'm going to take my HW08 location, and I want to show you an example of what this looks like with lots. So here, I actually have bulk candy that's coming in. You can see again, I've got my image presenting, and this is going to be a lot valuation. I'm going to do a lookup here just to show you that we are talking in real time to the system as to where those available items might be. I do have them in receiving right now. Perhaps I've received all of these in and now I'm palletizing to put them away. And I'm going to be bringing in the lots for my items. Using the lookup again, you can see I have 2 different lots here. I'm actually going to build this pallet with both lots on it. I want you guys to see what this looks like. So again, I'm going to do a quantity of 100. I'm going to go back to that bulk candy item. And I'm going to, again, put this from my bin, which is receiving. And I am going to capture that second lot information now. I, again, would enter the quantity. So maybe I only have 50 of these. And I can move on. I can, please note, just put 2 lots onto the same pallet number. Let's show one more example here. I'm going to create one more pallet, and that's going to be pallet 20. Again, I'm going to make sure that I've got my access to my warehouse. Where am I going to put this? This time, let's say I'm going to put it in my HW2 location. And just like before, it's going to prompt me for items. So I want to show a scenario here. I'm going to do some of those items from that bulk candy. So again, we're going to take them out of receiving. We're going to add them to this palette. I'm going to confirm the lot that I'm using at this time. And remember, and visualize these items being in front of you. That's how I'm going so quickly, because I'm just scanning barcodes that are going to be represented on labels, which is ideally how we like to see this solution moving. This time, I'm going to put only 20 of those cases onto that palette. And this time, I'm also going to add one more item. Now, I do have a high value item here, and it is my Jack Skellington animated figure. So let me get this barcode scanned. Again, I'm going to be selecting where I'm taking this item from. This is my serialized item. You can see I do have 1 in receiving, and I have 6 actually in a cage location. As I mentioned, this is a pretty high value item, so I keep these guys locked up. But I want that 1 in receiving to be added to this particular pallet. So I've chosen that bin, and it's going to ask me to scan my serial number. Again, I could do a lookup here to confirm the serial that I have. If it's right in front of me, I can do that quick scan. And you can see when we're working with serials, it's just given me a quantity scanned of 1, which means that I'm looped on this prompt until I want to break it, where I could touch back in the item prompt. But I can continue to scan serials and add them all to this palette. As an example, I just want to show you what I'm working on here to give you a serialized example. From here, the next thing I'm going to do is bring this information back into my Sage environment. Now, I want to be specific here. Everything that I've been collecting is already in the mobility for barcode module tables. Remember that barcode module and mobility for barcode were OEM'd by Scanco for Sage. So Scanco writes this module. Everything that is being collected here is already in my Sage environment. When I hit my send icon, it's the trigger for whatever information I have in this mobility for barcode to create the transactions I'm working on. In this case, I'm actually creating my pallet numbers within my system. I get a success message out on the handheld, and let's go take a peek at what we did. We can see this a couple different places. In item maintenance, one of the things that we can see when we look up those items, so we'll start maybe with my pumpkin buckets, right? We created those pallets out, and the first one we started on was 18. Now, in Multibin tab, we can see a lot of detailed information. Not only can we see the locations that we were receiving, but here, please note, we now have a pallet case ID field. That pallet 18 that I just created from the scan code that I put in my HW01 bin is now entered, date and time stamped with today. And if we wanted to, we could drill into those details and for those pallet creations, see who is creating them. I did log in initially with KB2. You can see that pallet created from the scanner at 18 with KB2 with today's date and timestamp within here. I added 100 to that pallet. We have a nice firm audit record. Again, I'm an auditor by nature. I like to sleep well at night, like to know where all that information is. So this was, again, a simple pallet that we brought just one item in on. Let's go ahead and take a look at our actual Halloween candy, because remember, we were doing a couple of different things here. On our Halloween candy, the one that we created into our HW8 bin that we created with, again, timestamp today, you can see in the lot and serial number, we actually have the ability to add additional lot and serial. This asterisk at the end is showing us that information. If I wanted to know more about my pallet in specifics and what's on that pallet, I do have a built-in pallet link here. This will actually bring me to that pallet maintenance should I want to make any changes. With a multi-bin solution, there actually is pallet maintenance within the system. I'm going to drop down to my setup here, and my pallet ID maintenance is one of those places that we can see that information. I can also have a pallet ID inquiry. Maintenance will allow us to make changes. Inquiry will just tell us more about that particular item. So that was pallet 19 with those 2 lots on it. Here you can see on this pallet representing one ID, I have my 2 items with my mixed lots. And now pallet number 19 represents a grouping of those items for that 150 count over those 2 lots. All right. The last example we wanted to look at was going to be 20, because on this pallet, remember on pallet 20, not only did we have something that was lotted, but we have serial information here as well. All of this ties back into your system. So again, using your imaginations, think, does this make sense for me? Is tracking this unique identifier with all this information, does this save me time in this process? And again, that's a question for you. So we've got these pallet ideas created. I want to take it a step further. Let's see what else we can do with license plating and pallets. I'm going to back out of my create pallet transaction. Now let's say I need to move those pallets around. Well, first thing I'm going to do is go to a pallet transfer. This is moving an entire group of items under one pallet number to a new location. So I know I've got a pallet I already created in my system. And again, barcoding, love the barcoding. So I scanned my pallet number 3, and I know it's in my receiving bin. The prompt I'm going to get here is asking which warehouse I'm moving it to. Now, this could be a warehouse to warehouse transfer. I want to be completely candid there. I'm using this as a location move within the same warehouse. So I have it in receiving. I've got it all wrapped up. It's ready to go. Maybe I'm going to put it into one of my other locations. This case, again, let's go to that Halloween 07 bin that I created. And it was that simple. When I hit send, again, everything was in those barcode module tables. And now that pallet that I was just looking at, and that was pallet number 3. So if I jump over to pallet number 3, in real time, I now have this particular item in this pallet. It was in receiving. I now have it in my HW07 bin. There's no posting that needs to happen with these movements, guys. I want to be very candid. If I did a warehouse to warehouse transfer, we would need to post that information. But in this pallet movements in bin locations, all of this becomes real time with no posting. All right, so moving pallets around once we've got them created, easy peasy. Let's take it one step further. I'm actually going to jump out over to counting items. Now, physical counts is usually that time of year where we just get a huge knot in our stomach. It's so time consuming. There is so much information that's written down. It's so hard to track everything. And we know that there's always variances. I want to show you what this could look like if we were to take items that are grouped together and palletized. And maybe we still have broken items, because you can have that. You can have a mix of pallets and loose items together. You can count the loose items, which would be way less time consuming, and then just go through and count those pallets. So in count by bin, again, I'm getting a confirmation of which warehouse I'm working in, and I'm going to say which starting location I'm going to start in. So in this scenario, we created a few new pallets. Let's actually use one of those. So I'm going to go back to my item maintenance really quick. And I'm cheating because obviously no one on the floor would have this information at their fingertips unless we print pick sheets, which we can still do. But I'm going to look at that pumpkin bucket, and I'm going to look at multi-bin and tell me which pallets I have there. So here, let's say I'm going to be counting that pallet 18 that we just created. I did put that in the location of HW01. So What we're going to do is we're going to say we're going to start in bin HW01. I'm going to look for the pallet ID. Again, if this was barcoded, I could scan it. Remember, I just created pallet number 18, so I actually don't have a barcoded label for that yet, which with these solutions, you can definitely have label printing at any point in this process. So from the device, you could be triggering that label print. You can see here, I have only these available pallets. Well, why is that? Well, the reason it's giving me these available pallets is because for this particular location, those are the only pallets that are available and previously existing here. So again, in my bin HW01, I only have pallet 5, pallet 16, and pallet 18. Now, pallet 16 are different items. So again, you can see how we're tightly tying this solution all together. I could choose that. I could scan that label, but I want you guys to see this next prompt. Is this pallet complete? Think about if you had a bunch of items together, and a lot of us have wrapping stations. Maybe they're all wrapped together, tight with plastic. We know there's been no breach in that. If we had a doubt that possibly something got taken from that pallet, we could choose to say no here. And I could go through my individual lot counts and my individual item counts. In this scenario, again, I want to show you, I'm going to say yes. My plastic's intact. Nothing's been taken from this pallet. And I have just done a physical count for all of those items that represented on pallet 18. I also want to show an example of lots, guys, because again, anybody who's doing lot and serials, this is where it's really going to make an impact for you. We created other pallets in our system today. We did pallet number 19 and 20. And in pallet number 19, we did have those mixed lots. So this is what we're going to do. In my next bin location, which is going to be HW07, I'm going to tap in that prompt, count HW07. I'm going to take that pallet ID, and it's going to be pallet 19 that I'm going to work on. Oh, interesting. I do not have pallet 19 showing here. Haha, that's because Kristen needs to pay attention. Remember, validation here, guys. Pallet 19, I misread it. It is actually in 08. This is real-time updated information so that the scanners and your stage environment are working in conjunction with each other. Now let's go get pallet 19. There's that one. Again, the prompt, is this pallet complete? I'm going to go ahead and say yes. Now remember, I have two different lots on that pallet. Just like before, I'm going to hit send. This send is triggering those mobility for barcode tables. And what we're actually triggering is the physical count entry. So here, under my inventory management in my physical counts, I'm actually going to drop down to physical count entry. I'm going to look at my main warehouse. And in that main warehouse, the lines I've been counting. Guys, it doesn't get simpler than this. My pallets are being counted, and you can see the counts for the items. It's all populated. It's all brought in, including my lot and my counts. This is a way that we can simplify even more that physical count experience. Doing it from the handheld already was going to streamline it a lot because we don't have someone sitting down at physical count entry and entering all this information by hand. But more than that, if we escalated into a license plating or a pallet tracking, and there truly are items that maybe you group together that you don't count that often, maybe it's something you don't use that often, we can bring it together and with a simple scan, record all of that information direct into your Sage 100 system. All right, I hope you guys are all excited because that was just covering our pallet tracking. So next thing I'm going to do here is we're going to jump really quickly back to our PowerPoint. We talked about license plating. Let's take a look at some additional functionalities here. Now, here's another one, big buzzword, wave batching. How many of us have heard this word before? Well, let's again define what that actually means. Wave batching is an auto-generated grouping of sales orders based on selected criteria that you choose. Now, with wave batching, there are great scenarios to use it and some that don't necessarily fit the model. So we're going to go through what's possible. One of the most common scenarios I run into is a customer asking, how do I know which orders can ship today? And that's looking not only at your order volume, but your available stock levels as well. what do we have that we can ship, and what's the fulfillment rate, right? Maybe we want to fulfill it 100% or 90% and hold back other orders. Maybe there's certain shipping classifications or the way that we're shipping. This solution is going to take your Sage 100 sales orders that are pre-existing, and you're actually going to be able to group them together based on a dashboard. So we can generate a wave batch picking list within Sage 100 and then run that out to the scanners so that we can work on that from a handheld device. So let's go through this situation. Again, I'm going to jump back into my Sage 100 environment and open that up just a little bit more so we can get good big screens. I'm going to go into my sales order. And with wave batch picking in Multibin, one of the options is this wave batch order selection. When I launch this, the very first thing that's going to happen is it's going to ask me for a wave pick number. Well, I'm going to generate a new one here. So we're on wave pick number 210. I'm going to give it a description. So we're going to call it KB, and we're going to say it's the 10-19-21 pick list. You can assign this to individual employees in the sense that you give it a description name so that employee knows how to find it. You can just do it as your customer pick list, whatever makes sense in this description. So when someone sees it on the handheld device, they know which ones they should be working on. Now, here is where I start getting into my selection criteria. Very first thing I want to point out is that if I hit select from here, it is going to pull in all of my open sales order numbers. So again, you can see I've got quite a few open sales orders. I realize this is a demo environment, so you're probably going to have more, but this is just a first round pass, again, at what we're looking at. Before I even hit select, I can choose to do different things. I can start to filter on specific order numbers or warehouse codes, right? I'm running multiple warehouses. Maybe I just want to see everything that can be shipped from one warehouse code today. I can look at ship vias, ship to codes. I'm going to scroll through this list. There is a lot of information that we can start to build these sorts on. One of my favorite things is we can actually change this fulfillment rate. So there right now it's sent to 10% fulfillment to 100%. Well, that's not good enough for me. I want to know that my orders can go out completely today. So I've hit 100% fulfillment rate as one of my criteria. When I hit select again, you can see some of my sales orders have dropped off that list. Now, one question I get from customers is going, Kristen, how can I trust the logic of the system? One thing I want to show you is that we actually have a log button in the wave batch order selection. When we look at that log button and preview that report, it's going to tell you why it omitted certain orders and why it let some come in. I have sales orders here, 181 to 183. They already exist in another wave batch. So those orders would automatically not pull in. They're already on a wave batch list. There's no reason to bring them into this listing. Sales order 184, I couldn't meet the fill rate selection. I could only fulfill that one 50%, so it omitted it. This is where, again, we get that nice tight roll up of why we didn't select something. If you're ever curious or you're doubting what the system is telling you, you can kind of look to see where the logic is coming in. So from here, let's say, all right, this is great, but maybe one more example here. I want to group it one more time, and this is going to be a ship via. This is another very common way to do a wave batch list. This ship via, perhaps I want to group orders together because I know that my UPS or FedEx pickup times are at a certain time. Maybe they take priority. Maybe the way I'm shipping next day air versus second day air, I need to get those orders together. If I had a criteria like this to my wave batch and hit select again, you can see that drops it down even further. So I have a lot of flexibility as to how I pare this list down. Now, one very important thing to keep in mind is you have to know the criteria that you're looking for to be able to set this up. There are defaults within the options that you can set up to make this a little bit easier. So I could default it to always be 100% and not have to manually key that. But this does require someone within Sage creating these particular types of lists. So depending on how far down the rabbit hole and selective you want to get, this may actually be more time consuming than it is to actually fulfill your orders. And we're going to look at one more example after wave batch picking to show you one more way that we can manage this. Now I am going to clear out and I'm going to go back to all. select one more time, because I'm focused on these 3 sales orders. These are the ones that I promised my manager I was going to get out today. So I'm going to unselect the sales orders I do not want and move them over to this is going to be my allocation grid. Now you can see these are my different counts. These are the quantities that I want to allocate to them. And to now allocate or promise these items and counts for these specific orders, all I need to do is hit my allocate button. Every single one of these sales orders now has an allocation to it. So from here, just to show, if I wanted to look at my sales order, I can right click and go to sales order entry. I want to point out, you can see now with wave batching in the system that we now have a wave batch number associated to the order. And on my lines tab, I now have my quantities that are allocated, which, taking it one step further, if we go into, again, that sales order and we go to an item, I'm now able to see at a high level a couple things. I can see how many I have on hand in my main warehouse. I can see how many are on my sales orders, how many have been committed, right? Which is truly what's on our sales order. And this can go negative. A lot of the time we see that based on our order volumes. But I also have an allocated quantity now. This is again brought in by those multi-bin tables. This is showing me how many I've now promised for my customers at this moment in time. So that kind of shows you again just how everything ties together really nice and tidy. I'm going to accept this wave batch list. And from here, I'm actually going to go back to that scanning device. For scanning a wave batch list, what we're going to do is use this picking icon, and we're going to go into wave batch picking. Now, remember, we ended up setting descriptions on that wave batch list. I called it KB's pick list for today. If I do a wave batch number lookup, you can see those descriptions come out to the handhelds. So again, imagine you've got maybe a crew of 3 pickers and you want to group a bunch of items together or a bunch of orders, and one's going to go to Bill and Bob and Tom. You can sit there and say, Tom, this is your list. Bob, this is your list. And you can do it right from here. Now, we created today's KB 1019-21 pick list. I can grab that list from here, and I confirm the warehouse I'm picking to. So this is the warehouse I have access to. And as I pick these items with a multi-bin system, where am I putting them all? My system is set up to default into a shipping location, but you can actually override this for the entire wave batch list and say, maybe I'm going to the UPS shipping location or the FedEx shipping location, if we've got different staging areas for these orders. Again, this is at your discretion and kind of what we talked through in the process and how we set this up. Now, launching into a wave batch, this is pretty tightly hard coded, meaning that we've at the office level said these are the sales orders we're grouping together. We've said that it's 100% fulfillable, which means we have the items in our warehouse. We need to make sure that we're doing these right things because the system is now promising these items. So you can see here, my shipping location I've set up. It's telling me which bin to go to. It's telling me which sales order this is for. Now, this is another important point. If we had a wave batch list for one customer, perhaps it doesn't matter what our sales order number is. But a lot of us do pick with forklifts and carts. And if we're doing multiple orders, we might stage the sales orders together into different groups. So when we drop them at shipping, we can keep them together. Wave batch can summarize all items together, or it can give you the specific sales order number. So again, depending on your picking processes, there is a way to meet if you're just grouping everything together, the sales order doesn't matter because it's all going to ship together regardless, or if we want to see those individual sales order numbers. It's telling me the lines I need to pick. It's telling me to scan this particular item for my buckets. It's giving me my description, my unit of measure, how many I've ordered. But remember, I'm using pallets. So this is how we build onto that pallet tracking ID. It's asking me first to identify the pallet. Now, I was prepared for this one, so I do have that one barcoded. And now it's telling me, okay, Kristen, you got the right pallet. Let's grab the items off that pallet. So I've confirmed my item. and I have 12 ordered for this particular sales order, and I'm going to enter my 12 and move on. It's also taking me to the same location, and this is again important with the way we name our bins because it can logically walk me through a good pick process. You can see that my sales order number has changed, but it's keeping me in the same spot. It's now grouped multiple sales orders and those items together for me. So I'm not crisscrossing across the warehouse trying to get this order fulfilled. I'm going to go back to that pallet and say, yes, I'm working on the same pallet. I'm going to take that same bucket item and I'm going to take those 30 now off. One thing I want to point out too, with the validation, if I try and overpick something, if I'm going too fast, we are validating to that sales order. We're not going to allow employees to pick too much. If they do short pick for some reason, it will give them a prompt to say that you've got unresolved lines. If we pick completely, which again, we set it to fulfillment of 100%, we pick completely, as soon as I'm done with this list, it's going to close everything out for me. So again, now on to my third sales order. It's still keeping me in the same location on the same pallet. Okay, great. This makes my life easy. I'm not crisscrossing everywhere. I'm going to go to that bucket. And this time there's just 2 on this order. So now I have my 12 buckets, 30 buckets, and 2 buckets all staged up on my cart. So I know which orders are going where. It's bringing me to my next item. The reason this is next is because it's the bin right next door. It's HWO2. So for this one, it's asking me to scan this item in this pallet. Now we can continue to go through this process. I do not want everybody to, I don't want to lose everybody. So I'm actually going to short this up because we've got 3 sales orders with multiple items on here. So what I'm going to choose to do is to send that information right now. And I'm going to say, you know what? I don't want to finalize my picking because this list still needs to stay open because I still have things I need to pick. But I'm going to say, you know what? Update those picks for me. So I get my information and it goes back into my Sage environment. I want to show you one more key piece in that item maintenance. Remember, I was picking off of that pallet 5 when I was working on the buckets. I want to show you guys, when we look at that multi-bin detail, that pallet 5, as I was picking them off, I've actually been reducing the quantity that was on hand in that pallet. So every time I took items from the pallet, it was taking items off of it and reducing the total quantity on hand. So we're tying this right back into physical count. Let's say I did have a pallet break. Depending on the processes that we use and the picking processes, if we do break pallets, if I were to go back to a physical count and count this pallet number 5 right now, it would still be showing on my system as 966 because I've been taking items and telling the system where I'm taking those items from. Okay, so again, we're getting real complex and down the rabbit hole. These solutions leverage onto each other and it helps our business continue to run as efficiently as possible. Now, as I mentioned, wave batch picking, it's one of the more complex processes. We really want to think about how we lay that out. But sometimes truly the wave batch list generation and someone sitting in at a Sage terminal and creating wave batch after wave batch, it's a little cumbersome. There are some automation techniques within that wave batch selection that we can employ, but they are pretty rudimentary. Kind of, hey, every 5 orders that I get in, create a wave batch list for it. It's pretty simple. You can't apply that awesome logic that we saw when we could choose and filter our grids. So what's another way that we can use this? Because maybe you're saying to yourself, allocations look awesome. I want to be able to promise those items out, but I don't necessarily want to do this in a wave batch capacity. Well, that's going to bring us to our final topic for today. A day in the life, we are going to look at sales order allocations. And this is a quick one, guys. How can I reserve stock when placing a customer order? Most common scenario here is when we really want to say to a customer on the phone, I have these in stock. These are yours. I am sending them to you now. This is truly taking individual items and promising stock for a specific customer and order. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, how many times has a customer rep come to you or you've been in that situation where you tell your customer, hey, I have this, maybe let's get this pick list out. I'll get it shipped to you today. Printer's out of paper, pick list doesn't print. Pick list gets shuffled down to the bottom of some other forms. We get somebody else with another big order that comes in and it sneaks in and takes all those stock. Now we're in the situation where we have to call our customer and say, I know I promised it to you, but we can't actually deliver it or ship it today. We're out of stock. Allocating at the stock level gives visibility to the demand and to your open items. And I'm going to show you a real simple example with this. So back into Sage one more time. Here in sales order entry, I'm just going to enter a brand new sales order. We're going to do this really quick. So I'm at sales order 200. I'm going to pick a customer and I'm just going to change my warehouse, make sure I'm in that main warehouse. We're actually going to look at item 6655. This is a pretty popular demo item, but here I want to point to the bottom of the screen. Our allocated available is listed as 9 each. Okay, I want you guys to remember that. I just have my cursor in the prompt for ordered, and I'm already being told this is the max that I can promise the customer if I'm talking about my in-stock levels. Well, how did we get there? Let's go into item maintenance and look at those stock numbers, stock levels again. So make this so we can all see it. Here, remember, in my ordered, it's saying that I have 9 allocated available. Well, what does that mean, Kristen? In my central warehouse, I have 23 of these items on hand. I have on sales orders, 16 of them, which means that 16, according to Sage, are committed. As I mentioned, you can commit to the cows come home. If you keep entering sales orders because you've got the demand for it, this number will push into a negative capacity. This 23 minus my 16 committed gives me my 7 available. This is all pretty common for what we're used to seeing. But we're actually not concerned about what the committed is. This is just the demand. I want to know what's been promised. What have I hard coded to go out to that customer? In this warehouse, you can see I also have an allocated column. This 9 available is showing me based of what I have on hand against what I have allocated. So this 9 plus 14 will give me my 23. This is important because these 14 allocated items have been hard promised to a customer, meaning when this customer calls, I can promise them up to 9 if they wanted to ship them out today. Now, how can I make sure that they ship out today? Well, I can definitely promise them for the customer. We do want to talk about how we'll get that shipped out. But let's say this customer absolutely needs 2. There are automation tools within allocations where I am allowed to allocate at the sales order level when I enter the line or I save this sales order. I also have the ability to hit an allocate button. So maybe even before I save it, and if my settings aren't set to save it when I accept it, I can actually allocate here, and it now has promised those 2 to this particular customer. If I go back to item maintenance, again, real time, guys, I don't have a refresh button, so I'm just going to leave that item and jump right back. You can see my allocated has now dropped to 16, or excuse me, has increased to 16. And now I can see if I wanted to put another line item on there just to show you, I now have 7 available. This kind of information can really hard code what we can promise for our customers. Now, I know we're bumping up on time. Really quickly want to talk to you about what that looks like if we needed to do this on the scanner. So those particular allocated, if we did need to do that picking, it is a special functionality on the scanner if we're promising something at the sales order level. And this is referred to as confirmed picks. It would walk through very similar to our picking process that we've already showed with Wave Batch, with telling the employee where the item is and what that item needs to be scanned. This would again feed in to your Sage environment, and it would allow for that transfer because we're going to be staging. We're going to be taking it from the allocated locations and putting it into shipping just like Wave Batch did. Now, ton of information to digest, and those were just 3 scenarios of pretty specific, complex types of solutions. I do want to open it back up, want to make sure we kept a little bit of time to go into our questions. So Kelly, I was going to ask you if you have a chance. Did we get any questions during that presentation?
We did. Here's a pretty good one.
All right.
How does the information get from the ScanCo software on the mobile device to Sage 100? So you want me to read the whole thing?
Go for it.
In other words, does the mobile device need to be connected via Wi-Fi to the same internet as the server on which Sage 100 is installed, or can it use some sort of proxy? I ask because the home office and warehouse are in different physical locations, and the warehouses do not have internet access to the Sage 100 server without creating a VPN connection over mobile data. I'm also considering moving my Sage 100 install from the home office to Azure.
Okay. Amazing question. There's lots of good components in there I want to talk about. Number one, no, absolutely not. Your Wi-Fi does not have to be on the same network. We have multiple locations where they actually don't use even Sage at that location. They just use the ScanCo software to keep their inventory levels directly updated to their home location Sage environment. The connection is established when ScanCo is doing the install with specific whitelisted IP addresses and dedicated secure ports. So this is truly a conversation that we would want to look at with your IT, but the scenario that you just laid out is something we have done lots of times before. And even if they are hosted environments, there are some parameters we need to set up and consider with the hosted install, but absolutely 100% that Sage install does not have to be at the same location as anybody using these handheld devices. They can be using Wi-Fi. It's also possible if you have a location or even a remote or field location that doesn't have Wi-Fi, there are devices that can use cellular data as well. So we would want to talk through the specifics of your situation, but what you've laid out, we have done for many customers in the past.
Excellent. Next question. Do parent items reduce child items in a wave batch picking?
Excellent question. So when it comes to that parent item, it's going to depend on how you have it set up within your Sage environment. Is that parent being generated from a manufacturing capacity, or is that parent just a parent sales order kit level? When we talk about wave batching and kits versus wave batching and the manufacturing processes, what really boils down to is if that finished good parent item hits your inventory levels, or if it's something that we're going to see more on like the operations management side, where the finished good item is truly fulfilled at that shipping stage. Wave batching would not be necessarily a recommendation if we weren't doing make to stock type fields. If we were doing make to order, we would want to look at other picking processes to help with that order fulfillment. So another amazing question in there, but it's going to depend on how we have that finished good parent item set up.
All right, next question. Can pallet tracking be used for issuing materials to job ops work tickets?
Another amazing question. Pallet tracking, as I mentioned in our history lesson, that boring part of the presentation, in 2018, we did see that the ACS group came into ScanCo and they started building multi-bin integrations for job ops or now operations management. Pallets can be used in a manufacturing process to issue full pallets, break pallets, issue partial pallets. You can use that if you're consuming those raw materials in a pallet sense in the operations management module as well.
Perfect. How about, can wave batch lists be created from the scanner?
Another good question. Wave batch lists cannot. They are not created from the scanner. It is something that is done directly in Sage. However, depending on your processes, we can create what are called wave lists on the devices. I know, let's get more confusing with the naming of the structures here. Wave batch is taking a bunch of sales orders together and allocating and tying them into a group with a wave batch number. Waving can be accomplished with the handheld device. If, let's say, you didn't want the office dictating these orders go together, but you've got a really seasoned warehouse team. They know what they need to pick. Maybe you have a supervisor and they've split maybe some copies of pick tickets down to the floor. Those pick tickets can have a barcode added to them. And when they are scanned, the employee from the handheld using wave picking can actually build their own list. The same kind of feel. Multibin will walk them through where they need to go so they're not crisscrossing across the warehouse, but it's more control from the floor because the allocation will come from the floor instead of the office. So a true wave batch list from the scanning device, no, but there is a way to do it if that's the methodology that works for your business.
And last question, can a manager assign orders to a specific employee?
Another amazing question. When it comes to, let's say we're managing our orders, because I know that was a lot of our sparked conversation, there are capabilities within the ScanCo software to use their dashboard at their enterprise level. This does allow you not only to assign a specific sales order to a specific employee with a notification down on the device, it allows you to actually use it as a texting tool as well. So you can actually message back and forth from that dashboard to the handheld device if there were specific, like, we need to get this out immediately kind of instructions. There are ways to do it. ScanCo is working to develop an assignment of wave batch lists from that dashboard out to a handheld as well. So there are some potentials there. And depending again on your fulfillment processes, yes, it's absolutely possible to assign specific picks to an employee from your office using a dashboard out to those handhelds.
All right, that's all the questions.
All right, guys, thank you. Those were great questions. It's nice to see that you guys are paying attention. Put me through my paces.
With that, I'd like to thank Kristen for walking us through warehouse automation today, and a huge thank you to all our attendees for taking time out of your day to be here with us at our NU User Conference. Lastly, this conference could not be possible without our valued business partners that sponsor this event to make sure that we can continue to put this on for you. So go ahead and take a peek at the Business Partner Hall that should be open shortly, and it's on our website, v-bcc.com. Thank you all for attending and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.